big day today. I've got our super special guest on the end of a Skype call. I've got the interview questions ready, so let's dial him up. Let's go. Right, so as we discussed, we've got just 537 questions that were put together from Planet Mondas Forum members. And what I'll do, I'll just read them one by one, I'll read them verbatim off the page, and we'll see whether you can stick within the rules guidelines we made you sign. So the first question is, what made you a fan of Doctor Who in the first place, and what are your most vivid memories of those early stories?
On the 23rd of November 1963...
Mum! I'm doing an interview!
I was
Tidy
in
my
the
room.
I was exactly 10 years old. So
Here we go.
I've been into stuff on TV, that's Parkland, all the Parkland, Venus, Parkland is in space, I'm in books on. And so all the Parkland is in Mars, Parkland is in Venus, Parkland is in space, I'm in hooks on. So, because those
Ooh, pickle. Oh shit. Yes, so that leads us on to the second question. You wrote some very detailed notes on the stories, including the missing episodes. Have you ever considered publishing them?
Well, I was using a sound recording, for 15 minutes. We got
Wow.
like 20 pages an episode. By the time we got to Power of the
Oh,
Dog,
blimey, I forgot to do that cricket ball for Mike.
Backstage, I was not sure enough to actually
Hello? Oh, he's gone. Well, how rude, just breaking off an interview halfway through. Ah, my portable telephone. Hello, Tim speaking. Oh, hello, the Facebook Missing Episode discussion group moderators. Good to hear from you. What do you mean you're suing me? No, I'll see you in court. You cannot copyright an interview technique. Hello. Hi. And a very warm welcome to Grumpcast 2. I'm Eric the Half-a-Bee, more commonly known as Tim. And for this sequel, we're joined again by Mike.
Hi, I'm Mike, and I'm less commonly known as Servo Robot on the forums.
And Richard.
Hello. I'm always known as Richard, but I am quite common.
Hello and welcome, Richard. So that's right, to commemorate the recent changes to the Australian Test cricket team, we've decided to cheat as well. And so we've upped our numbers by a factor of 1. So Mike, who's very much the David Warner of this podcast team...
Oi!
which is to say, a talented and game-changing opening bat. Michael, what are we getting up to this time?
Well, Tim, I say we have a look at some of the letters that our listeners have sent in, but mainly we'll have a look at the Enemy of the World Special Edition, which was released last week, but not here.
Oh, well, I'm sure somehow you've managed to get an understanding of what was on the disc, Mike.
By the magic of the internet.
The magic of the internet. Oh, you paid for it on YouTube?
Yes.
Yes, good. Anyway, that sounds good. But first, Richard, why don't you have a rummage in the old mailbag there and pick out one to get us going?
Okay, so here we go. I've got a letter and a parcel.
Ooh.
Okay, so here's the letter. Dear Grumpcasters, please could you get a message out there to Phil Morris asking him to return our fedora to the dressing up box? It's been 10 years. Yours, the Wigan and Lee Indiana Jones Cosplayer Society.
Okay, well, what's the parcel?
Well, there's a PS. While we were tracking down the hat, over the years we found various clues about what Phil Morris has been up to in code form. So please enjoy a game of Parse the Parcel.
In code form. Okay, so let's play some music. And away we go.
Okay, so here's the parcel, Tim.
Oh, It doesn't make a noise if I shake it. There you go, Mike.
Yeah, I'm just waving it next to my ear. I can't hear anything. Here, Tim. You have a go.
Back to Tim.
Thanks. Richard?
Thank you. No, it doesn't smell of anything.
It's a bit papery, but yeah, it's very light too. Okay. Oh, here we go. First clue. So let me quash this now. The Season 3 episodes have not turned up in Sierra Leone. The 10th Planet and Power of the Daleks have not revealed themselves in Singapore. Season 5 has not risen from a TV station in Nigeria. And a whole bunch of odds and sods has not turned up in Australia. That sounds... So I don't think I've ever heard that quote before. Somebody said that?
You haven't been on Gallifrey base a lot then, have you?
No, I think I've missed out that one.
It gets aired about once every 2 days.
Okay. I guess that's one of Paul Vanessa's quotes. So let me think. Season 3 episodes have not turned up in Sierra Leone, so they've turned up in Ghana, I guess. The 10th Planet and Power of the Daleks has not revealed themselves in Singapore because they've gone on holiday to Nigeria. Season 5 has not risen from a TV station in Nigeria because it's actually still there. And a whole bunch of odds and sods have not turned up in Australia because they're actually in New Zealand. How about that?
Well, that's an interesting thought. I think the interesting thing about this note is that the Season 5 has not risen from a TV station in Nigeria. That's perfectly true. Season 5 has not risen from a TV station in Nigeria.
No, it hasn't. And it never will, because Tomb of the Cybermen will never turn up.
And it never
for a
will.
start.
But there's always a but, isn't there?
Yes.
So, but Enemy and Webb have. And a whole bunch of odds and sods has not turned up in Australia.
Because some full stories are rumoured to be here.
Absolutely. Now, whether they are a fact that they've turned up, or Paul was actually relying on rumour there, or his investigation into this Mr. Melbourne character is interesting. So the only thing we don't know anything about, and how the unproven in any aspect element, is the Season 3 episodes have not turned up in Sierra Leone. There's two ways you can look at that, I think. One is to say that the Season 3 episodes have turned up elsewhere, or something else has turned up in Sierra Leone.
Yeah, well, the Season 3 thing is that Phil Morris did say that they'd been returned to the BBC in 1974. So they may have been returned and sent somewhere else, as happened with so many of these prints. So, they weren't in Sierra Leone, but they turned up somewhere else. I just said Ghana because everybody seems to think Ghana's the place, but it could be anywhere, really. It could be Ethiopia.
It's interesting that Morris is sort of out on a limb with that one because, everyone else seemed to think that they were still in Sierra Leone and got destroyed, and they went back to London in 1974 was out of the blue.
A bit like his thing about the Prince of Enemy and Webb coming via Gibraltar and Zambia. That came out of the blue as well.
Yeah, the thing about Sierra Leone is that there was only one man on the ground, as far as I know. There was only Phil Morris there, and I am presuming, and it's probably too big an assumption to be fair, but I'm assuming that anything that he fed back about Sierra Leone almost entirely informs Paul Vanessa's position on it.
Yes.
So it comes as a bit of a surprise when Paul initially is saying that they were all destroyed, because I assumed, and perhaps this is wrong, that was got from Phil Morris. And then later on, Phil himself relays the story about the film store getting blown up because the rebel leader felt worried there might be some footage of him there. But he himself has said that the films were returned in 1974. Well, maybe both can be true. Maybe Phil thought initially that the films were there, told Paul, and Paul then told everyone they were destroyed, and then maybe he uncovered a bit of paperwork later on, the traffic log, or whatever, the film traffic log, that said that the films were sent back. I don't know.
And maybe it was Monster of Peladon that got blown up, which really isn't such a bad thing, really.
Well, yeah, there were tapes there.
Yeah.
Anyway, jolly good. So I'm going to start the music again.
Okay.
So let's pass it around.
Okay.
Yeah, it's still looking. So I think this was one for me to open then. Okay. So this one is, I have no knowledge of the circumstances in which he found the films or the timing beyond what he said. So I think that's another Venezis one.
That sounds perfectly innocent to me.
Yeah, and
Sounds fine.
from memory, this is relating to the finding of the films in Joss and Phil Morris's insistence that this was in late 2011, which is what I'm going to call the Joss dating controversy in memory of the famous unit dating controversy from the 1980s. I guess the issue with this is that the dates just don't work. First off, we've got, we know for sure Paul Venezis was talking to Caro Skinner and others in the autumn of 2011, and he said this on Gallifrey so out in the open. And he says that he knew at that stage that Webb was back. Well, if he knew at that stage that Webb was back, then that must have been coming back for a while. It can't have been found at the same time. I guess more than that, I guess we're treading on to your territory now, Tim. Is the story of Richard Baker from February 2011 and the place where he worked and the package that was definitely picked up by Phil Morris. Do you want to tell the tale?
Well, I don't know if I know the story better than you, but Richard Baker, who worked for the International Logistics Company, which will remain unnamed, he said that he was handling a package. Was it a package or a box?
It's a box, wasn't it? Or package box type thing.
Okay, well, he was handling a box that Phil Morris came to collect, and when Phil Morris turned up to collect it, he purportedly said that it had Doctor Who in there and that we won't hear about it until the end of that year. I mean, the interesting thing about it for me is everyone who I have asked about it have said pretty unambiguously that some of Enemy and Webb were in there. So that is why I personally believe that the dating is given by Morris is unreliable or mistaken. But yeah, that's the story, Richard.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess the question we have to ask is why does he use those dates? So I mean, as you suggested, it could just be a mistake. I suppose the other possibility is that he wasn't in Nigeria in 2010, but he was in Nigeria in 2011, and so he's trying to retime it in order to fit in better with the narrative of him actually bursting into the room and looking at the dusty shelves with his own eyes.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get to that. We'll talk more about the recovery probably later on when we get to Enemy and Webb the Enemy of the World Special Edition.
Sure.
But yeah, and then the quote itself that you have: "I have no knowledge of the circumstances in which he found the films or the timing beyond what he said." How is that a typical Venezis deceit?
Well, but with Venezis though, it's always a matter of he says something that's almost true or that's ostensibly true. But can be twisted a different way. So he doesn't tell an outright lie.
No. So yeah, no knowledge of the circumstances in which he found the films or the timing beyond what he has said. But that doesn't mean that's what he said publicly.
Yeah.
I just think that's a very typical comment from Paul, and that just leaps out to me. And I think we were all on it like tramps on chips. Anyway, let's start the music again.
Yeah, there's still a few layers left on this. So, Mike, over to you.
Okay. It's just there's still nothing in it. Here you go, Tim.
Oh, thanks. Okay, let's take another layer off here. Oh, well, I've got my little bit of paper says two things. It's a question, and it says maybe Paul will find some season 5 cans propping up a shelf in a forgotten warehouse somewhere in Nigeria. And then Paul's replied, unfortunately I haven't. And this is from October 2011, and I think this is the first classic Venez's moment, I think, in that, I mean, you couldn't have scripted that setup for him, in that someone on the forum is daydreaming about the Africa search and has written, maybe Paul will find some season 5 film cans propping up a shelf, and classic Paul is, he just replies, unfortunately I haven't, and the missing but there is, but I know a man who has. I mean, he almost certainly, no, he definitely knew about the films. It's October 2011. And so... But
he's right again. He personally hasn't found them.
That's absolutely, he's 100% correct, yeah. But there is a missing... But I think this is a lot of fun, this one. I think this is a classic, funny moment. And it's an Easter egg planted by Paul. I mean, there's no point in who's he doing this for if not his own enjoyment. Surely he would expect people to look back at that and enjoy it. But this went completely under the radar at the time. He had a beautiful setup, and I think it just demonstrates that he will set out to, as he calls it, wrong foot people for the funsies. That's what he's up to.
Anyway, well, there's only so much fun we can have in a day, I guess. So shall we leave the parcel to one side for future use, and it's probably only got a pie in the middle anyway, and move on to...
Wigan joke, Claxon.
So before we go on to Enemy of the World, there were just a few things I wanted to say about the last episode you did.
I am.
Oh,
which I thought was very...
Critique, Mike.
Yeah.
Well, look, it was very funny, I thought, and it moved along at a good pace. But I was a little bit uncomfortable with the opening part you did about Moffat, Bill, and Chris Chibnall and the female doctor. So my thoughts are this. I mean, I'm prepared to give Chibnall a chance in the autumn.
Yes, I agree.
Mainly because I'm interested to see whether there's something new that he wants to do with the show that wouldn't work with a male doctor. Because I think that's the only reason we'd have for it. I think if it's just the time is right or it's inclusivity and makes for a worse program, then you know that doesn't really work for me. But if it serves a story or an arc or something like that, then okay, let's see what he's got.
Do you have an impression of Chibnall from his previous writings?
Well, not so much Doctor Who. I mean, most of his stuff is kind of a bit nondescript in Doctor Who, isn't it?
Oh,
yeah, it's a bit ordinary, I think.
There's the Silurian thing, which is kind of, you know, straight Malcolm Hulke, really, with not much new.
It's a bit of a redo, isn't it?
Yeah. And then there's Dinosaurs on a Spaceship.
I thought that was okay.
42. Not 42.
Well, 42 was...
42.
Three, Power of 3.
I like the Power of 3, the Power of 3, and I like Dinosaurs.
Power of 3's okay.
But the other two are a bit pedestrian. But
yeah.
Oh well.
So I mean, the other thing I was going to say is, you know, I feared for you because it's quite hard to hold the high ground when you're, you know, middle-aged and white. And if you look at what happened to Peter Davison, you know, he made a reasonable point about the Doctor being a good role model for young boys, but you know, he got obliterated because he dared to shout out against the consensus. But of course, the other side of it is if you don't voice those opinions, then they just don't get heard.
There shouldn't. In my book, there shouldn't be anything wrong with saying that you don't believe that politics should be at the forefront. And you know, I did say I wasn't disagreeing with the nature of the politics or any of that, or I was making anything but a homophobic comment. I don't think any of us would be at all comfortable doing that. And you know, I did say at the time that just airing the point that it shouldn't be in the plot. It shouldn't be just repeated. Someone re-articulating their sexuality isn't character development. It's just someone going around and repeating that they're gay, and it's never happened before, and it was done badly and unnaturally.
Yeah. Well, what I thought was that he was just repeating it because the thing was that it was almost as if Moffat had thought, well, the audience must have forgotten by now, so I'm going to have to keep reminding them. And it's like, well, you don't need to, because we do know what's going on and we do know the character, and the character was quite engaging, even though a lot of the things were fairly poorly written. I thought that Pearl Mackie did a really good job. But overall, we didn't need to know every second episode her sexuality.
No.
And that's basically the point we were trying to make, I think.
Indeed.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So as for Moffat, I mean, I guess I'm broadly in favour, but I've got some misgivings.
Don't you come on this! Don't you come on this podcast, Milado, being all equitable and fair-minded about Stephen Moffat, because that simply will not wash. You can't go back and watch Series 8 or Series 10 and tell me that was a bravura piece of television writing, can you, Richard?
No.
Next, you're going to be telling me that Let's Kill Hitler is the greatest story ever written.
So look, I mean, the first when the show first came out, there were parts of it that were tough to sit through. You know, RTD's first series, and you know, I'm thinking of the Slitheen two-parter when my wife looked at me and said, "This is bad kiddies television."
Yeah.
And in that one, the Moffat two-parter was one of the standouts, and it felt more like I was watching the old show.
Mm-hmm.
And then when he started his thing, I mean, the first time I watched Time of Angels, when that came on, I remember having a strong feeling that this was as good as anything that I'd seen in the whole run of the show. Yeah, well, you know, I mean, it was a strong feeling at the time. Haven't watched it too many times since, but you know, I thought it was a cracking story, that one. Not so much the second half of it, but that.
Well, there's a whole
first
part,
really
second
enjoyed.
part thing going on, isn't there, throughout the Moffat era? Look.
Yeah,
guys,
there's a lot of that going on, I think.
we can't do this justice in a little Richard feedback session. So why don't we do the next podcast about the Moffat era and try and work out if it went wrong and where it went wrong and what the weaknesses were, and then Richard, if you want to be fair and equitable about everything, we can pretend to have liked some of it.
Look, there is parts that are worth praising. Some parts, not a lot, but there is some parts that are worthy of praise.
How does that sound then, Jack?
I think so. That sounds good to me.
That sounds fine to me, and I'll try and find something funny to say and stop being so wishy-washy.
Fine.
Fair enough.
Fine. Okay. Why don't we move on? I'll tell you what. Have another dive in the old mailbag there.
Okay, so here's another one. So this is from Keith, who I think wrote in last time. It's come to my attention that I may have missed off some significant figures from my list of Scousers associated with Doctor Who.
Okay.
I found 10 more. Pauline Collins, from the Faceless Ones, Tooth and Claw.
Yeah.
John Scott Martin, Dalek operator.
Was he from Liverpool?
Apparently. David Morrissey.
He didn't have the accent when he was on.
Well, I mean, I think he was probably rared out of him.
You have to go to RADA to play a Dalek. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
David Morrissey.
Okay.
From the Next Doctor.
Yeah.
He's got quite an obvious Scouse accent. Clive Swift, Revelation of the Daleks.
Oh, yeah.
Charming at interviews.
Peter Serafinowicz, or some similar
really?
pronunciation, Before the Flood.
Oh, yes.
Sunitra Sarkar from Dinosaurs on a Spaceship.
Was she the Triceratops?
Almost certainly. And then stretching right back to the start, Jeremy Young from An Unearthly Child.
Uh-huh.
Derek Akora in Army of Ghosts.
Army scraping the barrel.
Yeah, a bit of a cameo appearance, that. Philip Martin.
Yes.
Yeah.
Writer of Vengeance on Varus. And of course, Philip Olivier, Hex in Big Finish.
That's a blimey. Well, I never knew half of those are from Liverpool, but yeah, there we go. That's a thoroughly comprehensive list.
Yeah, I think he's cracked it this time.
Yeah, there's no one missing from that, is there?
Yeah, no. Anyway, thank you, Keith.
Thank you, Keith.
I think we get the point. Anyway, I think that rather neatly leads us on to the Enemy of the World Special Edition, which came out last week. It's actually, as we record, it's pretty much 5 years to the day since Doctor Who Online issued their pre-announcement of something missing episode-y, and therefore it's 5 years of the Land of Milk and Honey, the completely joyous experience that has been the Omni-Rumor.
True.
And then in October 2013 we got the Enemy and Web announcement. So come on then, guys. How did you watch them? What happened? Where were you when they were announced? How did you feel?
Well, I was at home, It was a day that I wasn't working at that stage. I was recovering from an injury. And I broke my wrist, and I was sort of at home, and I'd heard about it, and it was about 10 o'clock in the morning, because it was midnight in the UK, so it was 10 o'clock in the morning here, and within about half an hour I downloaded both of them on iTunes, and by the end of the day I'd watched Enemy. So yeah, basically it was like full on. I saw the little the trailers that they produced was the first thing that I saw, which really got me really excited. Particularly the web one was fantastic, I thought. And yeah, I downloaded them, got them off iTunes, and yeah, Enemy I'd finished about 6 o'clock that day. So yeah, it was like a gorging myself on Doctor Who.
Richard?
Yeah, so somewhat similar. I mean, I remember in particular that week the Radio Times came out with an article saying that they were going to be released later in the week, and I guess that, although I've been following the saga, but that was the first time I thought, oh gosh, this really is going to happen. And I'm getting a thrill out of that. And then I woke up early the morning following the midnight announcement, started downloading on iTunes, and I had to go off to work that day, but I watched about the first 10 or 15 minutes of Enemy episode 1, and absolutely fantastic. I mean, I got all the exterior filming and then some of the early scenes at Astrid's house, and so much better than I could possibly have imagined. Really, really impressive.
Yeah, it was very emotional, actually. It was a very emotional moment. I rearranged the living room. I remember that, thinking, right, I'm going to watch this. I can't believe I'm going to watch it. And then I had a very nice bottle of wine in the fridge. I hadn't been saving for anything in particular, but it was a nice bottle of Chablis. And I stuck the armchair in front of the computer, put my feet up, poured this wine, and then I watched all of Enemy that night as soon as I possibly could. Yeah. I gorged on it.
Yeah, same with me.
And what a joyful experience. I had a lump in the throat, I think, when it, about 5-10 minutes into it, as it was sinking in that I was watching it. And I watched all of Enemy. I even rewatched Web of Fear 1, and then I fell asleep half drunk in the chair and woke up the next morning.
See, it was easier for me because it was daytime for me,
of
so
course,
it was perfect. Yeah. So, I had there was some glitches initially to download them from the Australian iTunes store, but they were there straight away, which was good.
Is that because they were hastily deleting Project Africa and retitling it?
Something like that. Yeah, and I downloaded them, and it was fantastic, and Enemy was so much better than I thought it would be.
And so, what did we think about the special edition then?
Well, look, I quite enjoyed Toby Haydock's treasure hunt making of thing. I think it's just a different way of doing it. It was a bit contrived, but it was different. Look, the thing I've got to say about it was that the revelation for the whole thing was Richard Bignell. He was brilliant. I thought he was sensational. He had this little twinkle in his eye. I would never have associated Richard with that, but I thought he was very game. He was sensational, and I think, look, in the end,
he warmed up a bit towards the end.
Yeah, Richard, you were fantastic, mate. You were sensational. It was so much better than Phil making his cameo appearance, and he did a reasonable job. And he's made it now that he's doing acting performances in special features. But he spoke to and I thought the ending was good too, particularly the production manager's daughter, because she'd obviously never seen or remembered
the Martin Lismore piece was lovely, wasn't it?
That was lovely, and I thought that was a really nice way to end it too, and I thought that was really quite sweet. The reminiscence from people were actually, it was interesting. I'd sort of, Mary Peach, I'd sort of seen her in a film that she made just before Enemy of the World called The Projected Man recently. Just, if you ever want to see it, it's full of Doctor Who luminaries.
Did you get the impression by any chance that Mary Peach couldn't remember much?
No.
Well, I very strongly got that impression, but maybe that was, you haven't listened to the commentaries yet, but wait till you get to the commentaries.
She vaguely remembered having met Patrick Troughton, though.
The other thing was that the bits from Barry Letts, which I hadn't really seen those before, when he was those archival interviews with him, when he was he was a bit he was less than impressed with David Whittaker, was the impression that I got.
Yeah.
And also, there was so much nepotism in it. It was unbelievable.
I'll tell you what I enjoy. Back to Richard Bignell.
Yes.
He was very gay.
He was.
He threw himself at it,
Yeah.
and it was lovely. But he's not very good at pretending not to know everything about it.
Yes.
So we were expected to believe, on the one hand, that he didn't realise that Fraser Hines' brother was in it.
Yes.
And then in the next sentence, he's telling Toby that Martin Lismore got his the production assistant,
Yes.
got his wife to assist on the shoot and then appear as an extra in episode 5 and 6 or whatever it was. And oh, bless him,
Yeah.
it was so contrived. I enjoyed the David Troughton
Yes.
interview
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
It was quite poignant, wasn't it? And it was quite sad, and it showed some of the distance between father and son.
Yeah.
I hadn't realised that David Troughton was in Enemy of the World. I assumed his first appearance was it the War Games?
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought, it was obviously, it could have lost about 20 minutes of padding, but they needed a vehicle to tie it all together.
Yeah.
Could have done without the Phil Morris bit.
Yes.
And much as I adored Richard's acting, it did it did pad it out rather a lot.
Well, I'll tell you what though. I was stuck on a tube train last week going up to London. South West Trains just gave up on me essentially, and so it actually helped me through that fairly horrendous experience. It was it was a nice jolly little thing while that was going on. I thought Barry Letts was really sharp actually in that the bits they showed in the documentary. And it was a shame. It's a shame he was really down on the whole thing. He obviously hadn't seen it in a while. Or the one thing that he had seen was episode 3, and he didn't think much of it.
Yeah.
But actually, if he'd been able to see episode 1 as we have, I think he'd have been a lot happier with his efforts.
Yeah.
Yeah, indeed.
And I thought also, there was a funny aspect as Phil Morris is praising David Whittaker to the heights. At the same time, you've got Barry saying that it's an absolute mess.
And how much of it was written by Peter Bryant? I think it was.
Yeah.
How about the Deborah Watling piece?
Well, I thought that was really lovely, actually. It was an affectionate sort of tribute to her. I thought it was really good.
I thought it was good that they'd got family
Yes.
connections in there, because I think otherwise it's just the usual suspects saying much the same things, but you got a little bit more insight into what she was like from the family members and their memories.
Yeah.
So you haven't listened to the commentary,
No.
Mike, but Richard has. What did you make of that?
Well, I mean, it was very plodding at the very best. I mean, there was a bunch of actors' stories, except it was a bunch of actors who didn't really want to be there, so it seemed.
Oh, really? So who's on the commentary?
Well, there's
Mary Peach and Fraser Hines.
Okay.
For one episode, was it? 2 episodes?
couple of episodes at the start. Yeah.
And then Gordon Faith comes into it, and he plays the guard who cuts up the steak on the plate.
Oh, okay. Oh, yes.
And the
BAFTA
problem
material.
was Mary Peach and Gordon Faith had absolutely no recollections that they could share. Poor old Fraser Hines, I think, wasn't getting a lot of warmth, and he probably felt slightly isolated. And
I think he was a bit mined out as well, probably as well.
yeah.
I'm not sure he had very much to say either.
Yeah, indeed. And poor old Simon Harries, the moderator. I don't think it's his fault necessarily, because he persevered with it, but he ended up doing about 50% of the conversation.
Oh, really?
And asking these slightly mismeasured questions, didn't quite get the sense of the mood of the room, and I don't know how on topic they have to stay or how on Doctor Who they have to stay, but I would have been tempted, if I was allowed, to do more of a Mythmakers type interview where you they can't remember a thing, and you start asking them about their career a little bit more. And what do you make of Milton Johns, Richard?
Well, he really didn't want to be there. I mean, he didn't want to be doing Doctor Who in the first place, and he certainly didn't. If it hadn't been for the paycheck, he wouldn't have done the DVD commentary either. So
I disagree. I think he did want to be there, and I think he wanted to be as awkward as possible. I thought it was hilarious. he talks a little bit about The Empire Strikes Back. So he warmed up talking about that because he got extraordinarily well paid for staying on site for weeks. But yeah, unfortunately, the commentary was a bit of a misfire. If you like hearing the moderator talk for half of it, it's fine. I don't mean.
Can I make a confession? I very rarely listen to the commentaries, to be honest. It's just.
I never sit and watch the show with the commentary on. I'll have it on in the background while I'm doing other stuff. So. We have the Philip Morris interview to go over, and we have an email in from Happy Go Lucky off Planet Mondas forum, and so I think this will make us talk about everything that can be talked about with this. So bear with. What I'll do, I'll read it out, but I'll stop because there's a number of things he wants us to talk about. So how does that sound, fellas?
Yeah, no, that sounds good.
So, hello Tim, hope you're well. I was wondering if you and Mike and Richard could address the Morris documentary on the DVD. Specifically, the inconsistency regarding 1. Web3's disappearance with no mention of the station manager and the fire.
Yeah, that is interesting. Maybe he's told the story so many times he's not going to say it, but he does mention something about last resting place, which sounds a bit sinister.
Who's editing the interview?
Paul Vanezes.
Well, I think that tells you everything you need to know.
I mean, all I have to say about it is he wasn't going to, I hope, start trying to out private collectors or whatnot on a BBC product.
No, he wasn't going to do that.
But that choice of words, and we might find the last resting place of episode 3 of The Web of Fear, that's a bit odd.
That is odd.
It does sound like a grave, doesn't it, rather than an actual episode.
It sounds like it's lied undisturbed for a long time. I mean, when we got burgled, I didn't wonder about the last resting place of my TV.
Yeah.
It was in someone's lockup, wasn't it?
I think Vanezis might have had him up against the wall and said, there's no way that stupid story's going in this feature.
Yeah.
Write to Paul and ask him if that's the case, Richard. Okay, number 2 is telling everyone that he doesn't get to see his finds until after they've been released, yet he advised the BBC it would sell well, even though there's no Daleks or Cybermen and everyone would love it.
Yes,
so
well,
he reiterated again that he doesn't get to see this stuff, and he didn't get to see Enemy of the World until afterwards. And at the time, when he was being snippets of online conversations or interviews at the time, he said, I haven't seen it. I haven't had a chance to see it. And yet that refers to this repeated story now that was last aired, I think, was it on the Who Talk commentary?
Yeah.
That he had this conversation with this girl worldwide, and they wanted to run with Daleks and Cybermen, but he said, well, we'd seen something. So what do you make of that then?
Yeah, look, it's interesting that he knew that it was worthwhile rather than then saying that he hasn't seen it. So he's not put it through a film, has he? So maybe he's spoken to them after it's been, at least some of it's been converted, digitally converted, and he's actually seen some of it whilst they were doing that, I guess, is the only answer there.
Yeah, but that documentary shows them actually doing the cleaning of the films, and it's
of Web.
Right, yes, yeah.
Of a Web episode, but during the film,
oh yes,
I think, if I remember correctly,
he says, doesn't
Paul says, do you remember this happened with Enemy episode 1?
He does say that.
I can't remember what he was talking about, the splices or something.
Enemy episode 1 took an hour. Yeah, it took an hour, and the next one took 10 minutes. Yeah,
that's right. And it was like, do you remember this happening?
Yeah.
Now, you wouldn't say that if that had happened the previous day or the previous week. So I can't remember now, because we've had this story in a couple of different orders as to what was looked at first. But I don't suppose it's beyond the wit of man that they had a quick look at Enemy 1.
Vanessa definitely says he looked at Enemy first.
Yeah. Right. Yes. Okay. And that was on Gallifrey base, was it? And then there's the Daleks and Cybermen comment. What do you make of that one, guys?
The way he tells the story, it's as if it's an option, isn't it? He doesn't
absolutely.
tell it as if, well, sorry, I haven't got any Daleks and Cybermen, so this is what you're going to have. It's like we decided to go with this one first.
Yeah. In the limited context that's provided, it's an odd little snippet, and I think the whoever it is at Worldwide seems to have an expectation that Daleks and Cybermen, or other material at least, is a viable option, and Phil's reply, as reported by him, but his reply seems to also agree that there is a choice, and that no, we're going to go with this.
Yes.
Number 4, most revealing to me, is that I spotted in the film vault that he showed us a Web of Fear episode 5 with the words copy B clearly on the label. Therefore there's a copy A and possibly a copy C. How many other stories had these copy A and B on the tins on the film or the film leader? If we knew about these on the returns we have, say Evil of the Daleks 2, copy A or B, then we would have a better chance of getting a full set of a particular story. Don't you agree?
I had a thought about this, the copy B. The copy B is obviously the copy that's sent to Hong Kong, the Hong Kong-Singapore one. Copy A is most likely Australia, I would suggest, being the first copy that they need to sell so they can sell it to other Commonwealth countries. Copy C could possibly be somewhere like New Zealand. And then the B and C in particular, not so much the A, but the B and C are then bicycled around the rest of the world, mainly to places in Africa.
That analysis does work with the broadcast as we know it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And therefore also fits in with the proposed bicycling route
Yes.
of Hong Kong, Singapore, Gibraltar, Zambia, Nigeria.
Yeah.
But that's assuming that copy B was written on there by someone at Enterprises.
Well, it would
or
have been
the BBC making the copy.
Yeah, BBC Sydney. Because if you notice, all of these copies that I've mentioned, they're all coming out of BBC Sydney, which is quite interesting in that it seems to...
Oh, is that a fact?
Well, yeah, because they did the Hong Kong ones as well.
Ah.
Oh, right. That's not in Wiped, is it?
I can't remember.
There's not a lot known about BBC Sydney and how they operated. Look, they seem to have done the distribution for Australia, New Zealand, and also Asia, which is Hong Kong, Singapore are both in Asia. They certainly didn't do Africa, but the African ones weren't getting first struck stuff, and I think that there was a comment by John Predel on the Missing Episodes forum. I think it was yesterday, maybe this morning. I can't remember where he's talking about these particular things. Somebody mentioned about the copies, copy A and copy B, I think. And he's talking about the bicycle routes and stuff like that, and that they wouldn't have struck copies just willy-nilly because it was too expensive to do it. And I'll say I could never see them striking a new copy for somewhere like Gibraltar or even Zambia, or even Sierra Leone for that matter, because they just simply weren't the type of places that would be able to afford it. And why would they, when they could get them from somewhere else? So it's interesting.
I don't think, just to answer Roger's question, I don't think there are any other instances of copy A or B or C being known to have been written on the film leaders or on the tins. I don't believe there are. I sought other opinions on this because I wanted a bit of help trying to understand it, and I was pointed towards the Restoration Team website where, and I hadn't picked up on this before, is that the original copy of Web 1 is struck from a different negative to the copy that was found in Nigeria.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there were indications that it might have been a dupe, the first one, because I think it had some shading issues that weren't quite as bright as the second copy. So that could have been copy A.
Yeah. Film's out of phase as well, isn't it? That's what
yeah.
I mean, it seemed also in the context of the video that it was a surprise to Venezis, that because he's asking what does it say, and then someone else says, I think it says copy B or something like that. It wasn't as if, oh yes, this we've seen this loads of times before. This is definitely the B copy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What did we make of the documentary though? Any thoughts on it? I thought it was really good.
Yeah, look, I thought that it there was a lot of photos shown, which I thought
that was the
really,
best
really
bit.
Good.
Yeah.
That was by far the best bit, and there was a lot of stuff in there. There were stacks of films on the ground. Yeah, and they can't all be American series. my feeling is that there's got to be something missing in there. They can't all be MASH. Like, I know they made a bloody truckload of MASH episodes, but they can't just be full of MASH.
Well, I've spotted something else in there.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well,
that's
it's
exciting,
off-
isn't
Go
it?
on.
Go on.
No, on one of the side of the cans, it said what I thought was a case for the bishop.
Yes.
Mm.
And so I did a bit of the old Google foo on that, and
Yeah.
it's the first episode of a Jerry Anderson series called The Secret Service, which I'd never heard of.
No.
Oh, the Secret Service, yeah, it's part animation, part... It's a weird show, yeah. Wasn't very
Yeah,
successful.
Stanley
yeah.
Unwin.
Yes.
Stanley Unwin,
Yeah.
evidently, who I adore. He's on Ogden's Nut Gone Flake, which is one of my favourite albums.
Yeah.
Anyway, so there is more stuff there that we haven't been told about. None of it's missing, of course, but yeah, I've spotted something else. So old Ogronic can add that to his signature on Gallifrey base. But
Well,
yeah,
they
hundreds
also
of
had,
films.
they had there was that stuff that had come from the Mauritius stuff. There was a can that had come from Mauritious.
Yeah, there was.
Oh,
But
yeah,
had gone
yeah.
to, but
Yeah,
had
yeah.
gone to another part of Nigeria. So it sort of proves the fact that they did rotate stuff around the country to keep them on the air.
Yeah, but I think the tone of the interview was, or my takeaway point was, left me feeling like it was a one-off. And you look at that photo of that chair, which is obviously very old and very worn, but doesn't seem to have been used, and it just seems like a bit of a dumping ground. And it did feel a little bit Indiana Jones, like,
Yes.
if I'm honest. You know, a room with no light, no air conditioning, and it's probably been barred up. The station history is quite suggestive of a time where there were circumstances where that room could have been just boarded up because it changed ownership from RKTV to NTA, and I think there is a window there for that room just to be boarded up and forgotten about, or whatever, locked. And then Phil Morris comes along 40 odd years later and says, what's behind that door? I don't know, it was quite suggestive of that. But I think another takeaway for me, and this did happen on the forums a little bit, was a reflection on, well, let's remember the great work that Morris is doing, and that he is going to these places. He's, there's a lot of sweat and blood and tears that has gone into this work. He mentioned how difficult the negotiations were and all that, and then he has been round these places. So I do try and pepper my more negative feelings on the forums with due praise, but it is a heck of a job he's doing, and I personally am very grateful for that.
Yes.
I just wish he'd stay off social media. But
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, it was a thing that very clearly, since the late 80s, was something that needed to be done, to go out and have a look and see what was there.
Yes.
And, many of us had that thought. None of us did anything about it. He was the one who did. So, that was a great bit of work.
So just some other quick observations from me about the documentary. He was very positive. Once again, the door is open for future recoveries of Doctor Who, and then the two remarkable Indiana Jones photographs are in there. So it appears that he is wandering around living the dream,
Yes.
dressed as Indiana Jones.
Yeah, you can go through life cosplaying, that's fine, I don't care.
I hope others enjoy him doing that as well.
Yeah.
But it was interesting that one of the photos was him next to somewhere in Zambia, and I presumably he wasn't going around dressed as Indiana Jones before the Omni rumour, so he was still working in Zambia in 2013, 2014, even though in 2009 he'd reported that there was no Doctor Who there. Thought that was quite interesting. There was a very brief glimpse of a photo next to the Ascension Island base. Now, I'd known he'd been there because I think he'd let a few photographs out into the wild before.
Yeah, he had.
But that is real barrel scraping territory, because I think they only thought or knew that they might have a copy of the Sea Devils or something there.
They
if memory
did, yes.
serves. So I thought that was interesting, and that shows the breadth of the search, and that he is going absolutely everywhere.
Yeah.
Well, he says very clearly in the documentary, things can be found in places they were never sold.
Films moved on as a batch later on to be used for later sales to another country, perhaps, and
Yeah.
he keeps hinting at that.
Yeah,
But he
this-
only ever mentions the classic example of
Cyprus.
Cyprus. And then just to wrap up on an Enemy of the World, we had a typically hinty Phil Morris comment, or was it hinty, was it not hinty, about Evil of the Daleks. What did you make of that, Richard?
Well, I mean, it's not in his nature to be particularly tricky, I'd say. I mean, obviously, he says to do surprises. He's been a bit hinty on Twitter here and there. But yeah, it's kind of odd for him to bring that out of nowhere if there's nothing to it.
Yeah, it was kind of odd. It's now his new favourite Dalek story after he's sort of given up on power. Maybe the animation's sort of done him cold or something, I don't know. But odd thing for him to say.
People are allowed to change their mind.
Oh, of course.
I mean, if you ask me what I'd most like to see, I'd probably tell you the Abominable Snowmen today and the Mythmakers tomorrow and something else the day after that.
Mm-hmm.
He does seem to have read this David Whittaker thing that has changed his mind about certain things, because when he was asked previously, he said, my greatest find would be the power of the Daleks.
Yeah.
And now I think everyone would like to see Evil. But he just has this way of talking about things in a positive... such a positive way.
Yeah, he also
I mentioned it last time.
Yeah, he also talks about the Crusades as well. He mentions that too. But he obviously has no love for Wheel Folk. He doesn't mention that at all. So, which is very disappointing from my perspective. But
except to hint to somebody in Bristol, why aren't you asking about Wheel?
As I said last time, I think he's just got this way of talking that no one else would talk in such terms about finding things.
Yeah.
So it's a reasonable sort of inference to assume that he's got, as Andrew Cartmel would say, special knowledge.
Funny little smile at the end, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Fade to black.
As we will on The Enemy of the World. Right then, before we go, let's have a look at some other notes in. We have had quite a number of notes. We've had a dozen or so just thanking us for the podcast and giving encouragement and support. I've been really bowled over by it, by the goodwill expressed. So hopefully, we'll get lots of listens for this one, and there'll be many more to come. So we have this note in from Dr. Watt on PMF, and it says, Grumpcasters, I finally got the chance to listen to the podcast and just wanted to say a big thank you. I really enjoyed it. Oh, thanks.
Thank you.
Please, please can you do another one when you've got time? Yes. My question to the illustrious panel would be, do you think that PMF could organise an alternative Gallifrey 1 convention where you invite people to talk only about Classic Who, but in the UK, perhaps in Birmingham? There could be a competition to see who could make up the most plausible rumour of a missing episode having been found, and secondly, what are the chances of Kaleidoscope finding the missing 37 episodes of Bullseye? By the way, Bullseye is fantastic and is currently on Challenge Channel. It's so bad, it's really good. Anyway, thanks again, Dr. Watt. Do you know Bullseye, Mike?
No. I think it's a show that's definitely never been shown here.
Oh, you don't know what you've missed. What are your memories of Bullseye, Richard?
Not too many, to be honest. I saw it a fair few times.
Obviously made a great impression.
Yeah.
It was Mike. It was basically the very natural marriage of pub darts and a quiz. So you had comedian Jim Bowen, who very sadly passed away a week or two ago, and you'd have in your team the guests. There'd be 3 teams, and it'd be 1 darts thrower and 1 quiz expert, and the dart thrower would throw for a category and then answer questions for cash. And then it was very well known for a couple of things. One would be, one of the rounds would be the dart player would go for the dart board, and each section would represent a prize. So it'd be like, in 1, look the part with the selection of ladies' headscarves. And there were, in 2, chicken in minutes with this microwave oven. And then ultimately they could gamble everything they'd won for the big prize, which would be this speedboat or a mini or a holiday in Lanzarote or something. And
So it's not the usual British quiz show then when they win £1,000 if they're lucky.
Blank check, book and pen.
Check pen and book, yeah. Anyway, happy memories of that. I think the chances of Kaleidoscope finding anything are more likely than anyone else finding anything at the moment. Anyway, thank you very much for your kind words, Al. And I, for one, am not organising a convention in Birmingham. And then we have another note in. It says, "Dear Eric and Servo, I write to you from the year 2050, where I am reflecting on my Big Finish collection in its hollow warehouse. Among my favourites are the Lady Christina adventures, which were shortly followed by Pigbin Josh, the Coherent Years, Ursula Blake, The Life and Loves of a Paving Slab, and then the Gum trilogy, which is Schoolboy, My Life Doing the Kenneth Williams Look, Old Woman, 101 Recipes for Raw Tiger, and Radiation Meter, Danger."
Funny you should mention
signed off Dave. Oh, go on.
I was going to say, it's funny you should mention the old Radiation Meter, because when I was a teenager, I wrote into Doctor Who Monthly for a thing they were doing. I think it was probably called Smart Alex Corner, but it may have been Matrix Data Bank or something like that. Anyway, ask all your Doctor Who questions here. So I said, well, okay, what about the radiation meter then? Because in the Dead Planet, it swings to danger. They go out, wander around the forest, and then they come back to the TARDIS before they go out again. So why don't they notice it's saying danger then? Anyway, I got some kind of a reply from probably Richard Marson or Jeremy Bentham telling me not to be so silly. And but if you look back in DWM 60-ish, you'll find the young Richard Smith asking this question.
Well, you see, that's why the radiation meter is so fertile ground for a Big Finish production.
Definitely.
Anyone would think they were scraping the barrel by that point.
No.
Assuming this happened, and this isn't a completely fictional note, but it's obviously got an edge, this radiation meter. It obviously didn't want to flash to danger until they were already out the door, like it was laughing at them.
But then I guess
and then when they came back in, it pretends to be asleep.
Absolutely, yeah, we'll have to have a word.
Yeah.
We'll have to come up with a plot line for that.
Yeah, and then they could do a series on the fast return button, and then maybe the two universes can cross at some point, and they can get together and have adventures of their own.
Fluid Link as well. I think Fluid Link's got to be the third member of the trilogy.
Fluid Links. Yeah, they use their combined superpowers. The vapours from the links, the flashing red light, and sort of laconic detection of danger from the. Anyway, yes, we don't want to give them ideas.
I've got one here from Space Pirate. It says, "Hi Servo. As you know, when it comes to the Omni rumour, there are believers and non-believers. Ian Levine, for instance, was initially a believer. Then in June 2013, said it was all a hoax, and then he said he was a believer again."
It's like every day in my head.
Yes, the torment. As you probably also know, there are fans who are absolute believers that Phil has already found a big haul of episodes, and that we are just waiting for him to announce it, and others who think it's all a load of all toss. But as we know, 2/3 of the rumours came true in the form of the return of Enemy and Webb. So by way of long introduction, is it possible for the Grumpcasters to analyse the things that have been said by Phil Morris, Ian Levine, the BBC and rumourists, weigh the evidence and come to some sort of conclusion about the probability that Phil does indeed have more and has done for some time? Thanks, guys. Here's to more episodes of the Grumpcast. Regards, Space Pirate. So what do we think about that?
Well, take it away, fellas.
I think that this is a whole podcast in itself, to be honest.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think we can certainly. I don't think we can talk for an hour on each edition about the Omnirumor, but no. I think we should probably do a reasons to be cheerful. I think.
Yes.
Are we all in the believer camp?
Yeah.
So to speak. Is there more Doctor Who to come?
More Doctor Who. If it's not Doctor Who's at least got something that we might want to see out of the unknown. Something. Who knows? He's got some missing stuff, I would say, and hopefully some of it's Doctor Who.
Well, I'll tell you what then. We can't talk about the Omnirumor every edition, and the next edition we're going to do about the Moffat era, but then how about for the 4th edition we do a last one on the Omnirumour until further developments, where we all argue the case for, or try and prove the case for, further Doctor Who finds, and then, like I say, we'll wrap it up until further evidence comes to light.
So is that it then?
Bye!
You're supposed to groan, Tim.
Oh shit, my phone just pinged in the background. Oh, that's an Easter egg, isn't it? Right, do your bit again, Mike.
Okay. Now, I couldn't remember Paul Vanessa's. Okay? Vanessa's?
Yeah.
Vanessa's.
Vanessa's. Get it right. Vanessa's.
If
Like
you go
Vanessa,
into
Vanessa's.
it and then... Go on, Richard,
There's
sorry.
nothing to say it's like Aunt Vanessa's, but anyway, go on. From Logopolis.
God.